entire history of gaming, there are only a few titles that hold a place in the public consciousness like Duke Nukem Forever. Originally supposed to be a quick follow-up to the 1996 bestseller Duke Nukem 3D, Forever would live up to its name and enter an endless development cycle that brought its whole crew down with it. Well before finally burning out on May 6, 2009, it had become a running industry joke, a comedy of errors at every possible level of game creation. It is the epitaph of Apogee, a once vibrant company that came from a basement programmer who single-handedly combined new technologies and a savvy business model into one of the most cutting-edge and profitable publishing outfits of his day. That a house that innovation built could allow itself to stagnate so dramatically and so chronically is truly one of the great tragedies of the industry. A tragedy not because they were always doomed to failure, but because they once had the resources and the opportunity to become the most successful game maker in the market. How on earth could they have let it happen? To understand the fall, you first need to understand the rise. And to understand how it reached its apogee, you need to meet a boy who once spent his days putting quarters in a slot. In the early 80s, Scott Miller was an avid gamer who won some arcade tournaments in the local Dallas scene. With a little bit of programming experience under his belt, he also made a number of games on his own time. These he distributed through bulletin board systems, or BBSs, precursors to the modern World Wide Web. He would announce on the board that he had a new game and that anybody who wanted it could download it. While common practice in today's networked world, this was bleeding-edge technology at the time. His familiarity with the subject led to a career as a freelance gaming journalist, writing for various publications, including a weekly column in the Dallas Morning News. But as he started writing more and more reviews, he found that he was beginning to realize what made a game work and what didn't. And so, in 1986, he decided to apply everything he'd learned and start developing games seriously, with an eye to making it a second job. The first result of this effort was Beyond the Titanic, an all-text adventure game. This was quickly followed by Supernova in the same genre. The business model was simple. He would release it as shareware on bulletin board systems just like his older games, but in the game itself he would ask for donations if the player liked it. It seems pretty straightforward, but at the time, this was groundbreaking. Before BBSs, distributing a game required the capital and ability to produce large numbers of discs, put every one of them in its own packaging, and then ship these to either mass-market retailers or the consumer directly. But Miller was one of a small number of programmers that had harnessed the power of the emerging internet phenomenon to cut all of this out. They didn't have to deal with manufacturing costs, shipping manifests, or insurance policies. All he needed was a computer and a modem, and he could deliver his product to anyone, anywhere. This is 1986. Windows and the Macintosh had barely hit the marketplace, and these guys were inventing digital distribution. And Miller was the very first to give digital distribution a commercial spin. But despite the incredible leap in business practice, the economics weren't working out. Miller would be among the first to ever realize that people on the internet, even the early internet, didn't like paying for things they could get for free. Despite his in-game pleas for donation, very few gamers ever did so. If Miller wanted to make this work as a second job, he'd need to increase his revenue somehow. How could he get gamers to pay? The solution he came up with was forehead-slappingly obvious. Instead of releasing the entire game for free, he would only release his first chapter, or episode, for free. And so, in 1987, he posted Kingdom of Kroz up on BBSs around the world, which was only episode 1 of the Kroz series. At the end of the playthrough, the gamer would get a promise for 2 more episodes, and an address. To get those episodes, they'd have to send in a check. No more donations. Miller was making a sale. He figured that this would increase revenue. It didn't. Revenue exploded. Miller went from having a hobby to a second income source overnight. The strategy had worked, and shareware finally had a business model that was profitable. This model came to be known as the Apogee model, after the new name for Miller's enterprise, Apogee Software. Each new game that Miller produced followed the same formula: a free first episode to entice gamers to buy the following episodes. It would be years before other companies caught on to the simple genius of the Apogee model, which has since led to the modern practice of releasing a demo before the full game. And Miller realized that it didn't only have to work with his games. He was in a perfect position to become a one-man publishing house using his Apogee model on other developers' games. And so he reached out to as many other talented developers as he could find, promising them a standard profit-sharing deal. Apogee would post the game to all the bulletin boards, host the game files on its servers, and use its good reputation in the community to boost interest in the title. What was more, Miller promised that the developer would retain full IP rights to their game, a deal that few other publishers would hand away. It all combined for a meteoric rise. By 1990, Miller was making more money from his one-man publisher-developer than he was from his freelance journalism. Recognizing that he could have a serious business on his hands, Miller quit his day job to focus on Apogee full-time. To make Apogee into a AAA studio, Scott Miller was going to need more employees than Scott Miller. And so he turned to his old high school buddy and fellow game lover, George Broussard, and brought him on as employee number 2. Little did they know that their combined talents would launch them to the very top echelon of the gaming world, before their overconfidence crashed the whole thing down on their heads. Tune in next time to see how Apogee's success would accidentally give birth to the shooter genre.